Let's talk about the developmental approach. Most basic foundational principle. Nothing is, everything becomes. Nothing just sits there as some essential thing. Everything develops, moves, becomes a better version of itself. The developmental approach is a perspective, it's a way of thinking. So, development is a concept that superordinates many other concepts. For example, development doesn't just mean change. It doesn't just mean growth. It doesn't just mean age-related change, and it doesn't just mean history. Development is different than all of those concepts. How? Well, here's change. You can see that the image on the screen, that things are changing in it, but nothing is developing. A change is any difference over time. You're seeing all types of differences going on there, but a change is not a development. Look, the orientation of the is changing. His voice is changing, but that's not development. Change alone isn't development. Well, how about growth? Is growth development? There's something that's getting bigger, an increase in size or amount. That's growth. Something is getting bigger. But again, something can be getting bigger without it developing. So this person's hair is getting longer. In this beaker, we get something that is, there's more. So we could say that the amount is growing. There's an increase in size, an increase in amount. However, that's not development. We wouldn't say that the water in the beaker is developing, that the size or anything about the triangle is developing, or that the hair, as it gets longer, is developing in some way. So what is development? Is it age-related change? Well, here we go. People change with age. Here's an example of changes in a person over time with age. We could say that the height of this person, for example, shows systematic change over the lifespan. Is that development? There's our curve. But wait a minute. What happens when a person gets very old, if you will, maybe gets dementia or Alzheimer's, and what happens to their memory? Their memory functioning begins to deteriorate. That certainly is an age-related phenomenon. It only happens, or generally happens, when people get older. But would we say that one's memory functioning is developing when it is declining? That doesn't make any sense. So that an age-related change is not the same as a developmental change. It's going down. How about history? We say that something is developing. Is that the same as saying tracking the history of the thing? We could define history as an accounting of changes in events over time. An accounting of changes in events over time. Not just changes in events, but it's an accounting of it. It's a representation of it. So, we can move from agrarian to the Industrial Revolution to the Depression to the Internet. This is a historical set of changes, but is it a developmental progression? I mean, if we want to talk about development, we might say that the Industrial Revolution is in some way better than an agrarian society, more developed than an agrarian society. But then we get this depression where the Industrial Revolution seems to be falling apart or having some negative flow. Well, then we get the internet. Well, is history certainly moves, but it doesn't necessarily move in the direction that we would talk about when we were talking about development. History doesn't mean development. History doesn't develop necessarily. History simply moves. In what direction? Development. One way to think about this might be to talk about the process of becoming something. Development is the process of becoming something. That's one definition. One definition. But look at the becoming and the something part. Development is a process of becoming. Something is coming into being, and there is a something that is coming into being. What do I mean by this? Let's play. Development, unlike any of those other terms, change, history, age-related change, growth, is a directional concept. When we say something is developing, we're saying it's moving in a direction. What is that direction? And when development occurs, it moves in the direction of an endpoint, whether that endpoint is real, hypothetical, or idealized. The endpoints may not exist in the world, and in fact probably don't. When we say that that something is developing, we have in mind some endpoint, some ideal state toward which the thing is moving if we are to regard it as developing. Development thus implies progress, and progress toward some endpoint, some ideal state. So there we go. Development is directional. It's moving in a direction toward something, and the little blue sun there is the endpoint, the ideal that we want something to, that we believe something is developing toward, or that we judge something in relation to when we say it is developing. Development is transformation over time toward an endpoint. It is not just change, growth, age-related change, or history. When something is developing, it is being formed. It is being formed. It is coming into being. Its actual structure is changing. So, 3. When something is becoming more developed, when its structure is changing, it is becoming more like its idealized end state, a state that does not exist except in our minds, necessarily. So, here's an example. Let's talk about embryogenesis, the development of the embryo in utero. What do we have? We start off with an unfertilized egg. Sperm comes and fertilizes the egg. We now have a fertilized egg, a zygote. Now, what happens to that zygote? We start off as a single, global, unfertilized egg. It is one cell. There is nothing in that cell that contains any of the parts of what's going to come later. There's only one undifferentiated cell. There's no heart cells, there's no central nervous system cells. It's simply an undifferentiated cell. Now, none of the parts in the to-be-developed fetus are present in that cell. It is undifferentiated. That's what undifferentiated means. Not yet differentiated, not yet specialized. Then what happens? The cell undergoes cleavage. This is the initial differentiation. The cells divide into identical but smaller cells. There you go. Same cells, same cells. They're identical, but they're smaller. And those cells divide, and those cells divide, and those cells divide, and so on and so forth. And so what we're getting is multiple cell divisions. Where there was once one cell, now there are many identical cells. We get the zygote. Now, this process is called differentiation. Where there was once a single cell, now there's many different cells, but they're still the same. It's an early stage of differentiation. Where there was only one cell, now there is many differentiated cells. Where there was once only one undifferentiated cell, now there are 2 differentiated cells, 3 differentiated cells, many hundreds and thousands of differentiated cells. The new cells were differentiated out of the old one. You had one, and then it split, and the new cell literally came from splitting and differentiating from the old cell. Now, important here. New cells are not just added. The new cells were literally differentiated out of the old one. You didn't have a cell, and then from some other place, another cell was added to that cell, and then from some other place, another cell was added to that cell. No, the cells are literally differentiated out of the initial cell. Again, where there was once only one undifferentiated cell, now there are multiple differentiated cells. The new cells were differentiated from the old ones. It's going to become a very important principle. New cells are not added to old ones. I'm harping on this for a reason. Each cell splits in 2, and each cell is now differentiated out of the old one. An important principle, differentiation. Now, in embryogenesis, the process continues. We've got an initial cell, undifferentiated, it differentiates. There's the initial cell, it's undifferentiated, it becomes differentiated. Then what happens? The cells begin to specialize, which involves further differentiation in the sense that these cells here, some of these cells become now even more different from the other cells to become endocrine cells. Other cells become central nervous system cells. Other cells become skin cells, and so forth and so on. So that where there was once an undifferentiated cell, now we have many differentiated cells. Now we have further differentiation in the sense that these cells are becoming different from these cells, are becoming different from these cells. And then, as time goes on, you get further specialization, which involves differentiation and integration. What does differentiation mean? Becoming different. What does integration mean? Coming together, becoming connected. So things that become different are now becoming connected. Things that are becoming different are now becoming both different and connected. So that here's your central nervous system cells, here's your skin cells, here's your bones, here's internal organs, eye, central nervous system. They all are different from each other, differentiation, and they're becoming connected to each other. Undifferentiation, initial differentiation, further differentiation and integration, and then we get a baby, which is a differentiated and hierarchically integrated being. What does that mean? It means we're adding hierarchic integration to this process. The baby is one unit made up of many differentiated systems which come together to form one system, the baby. One highly integrated and differentiated system. So development moves from an undifferentiated states to states of increasing differentiation and integration and hierarchic integration. That is the orthogenetic principle. Again, we start off with an undifferentiated cell, they become differentiated. They become differentiated from the old ones. At each step, new differentiated cells emerge from old differentiated cells. So development means the process of becoming something. Now, do the same thing with our concepts. Okay? Let's say a child is developing their concepts of animals. And you got a very young child, 2-year-old, 2.5, 3-year-old, to see the cat over there. That cat over there is Billy. The kid's understanding of the cat, Billy, is Billy. Well, what happens? Development is the process of becoming something. So you've got a kitty there, and you also bring a bunny home. And now what the child has to do is have to begin to discriminate or differentiate between Billy and the bunny. Mom, Dad comes along and says, there's Billy, there's the bunny. There's the kitty, there's the bunny. What was once a single undifferentiated concept of the world, of animals, that's just Billy, that's all I know, now becomes kitty and bunny. The baby, the child, differentiates kitties from bunnies. And then, okay, what do we get here? We get some integration of the ideas. We start off undifferentiated, we have differentiated, and now we're going to integrate. Okay, a kitty and a bunny are different, but they both have tails and they are both furry. That's some integration. How are they alike? A kitty is like a bunny because they both have tails, they both have furries, they're both small, they both have claws, and so forth. And then what happens? We start off with undifferentiated with Billy. We separate kitties from bunnies. We integrate kitties and bunnies, see how they're different. And then what happens is we're going to, through more development, we get hierarchical integration. We say cats formerly kitties, and rabbits, formerly bunnies, are types of animals. Our concepts now become hierarchically integrated in the sense that we can see that cats and rabbits are types of animals. Cats and rabbits are both furry and they have tails and they have pets. Cats are different than bunnies because cats say meow and rabbits say something else. And the rabbits have a cotton tail and they hop, and cats have a long tail and they hide and sleep and do all the types of things. But both are types of animals. Now, can you see what's going on? Undifferentiated, differentiation, integration, hierarchic integration. There's your orthogenetic principle. Development, the process of becoming something. Development, the process of becoming. Becoming involves structural transformation. The structure of the thing changes. It becomes more differentiated. The parts become differentiated from each other. It becomes more integrated. The parts become connected to each other, and it becomes more hierarchically integrated. The differentiated parts become more connected with each other and then function as a single hierarchical unit. Now, that's the orthogenetic principle. The process of becoming, that's how becoming happens. That's what it means to say something is developing. It's becoming more and more differentiated and integrated. But wait a minute, there's more. Complex concept, this concept of development. It's becoming more differentiated and integrated, but it's becoming something. It's becoming something. Well, that something is defined by its endpoint. What's it becoming? What do we think it's going to become? What do we think it should become? An endpoint is a real, hypothetical, or idealized conception of what the thing is moving toward. Now, note that thing is not just in the world. Perhaps sometimes we can say it's in the world. In the embryo, we see the baby, and we see that the baby is a hierarchical organization of bodily systems that function as one. But much of the time when we're talking about development, we're talking about something more hypothetical. If we want to say the development of a relationship, the development of the self, the development of emotions, well, we have in mind what we take to be developed selves, developed relationships, developed emotions, developed mathematical concepts, the developed essay. The person's going to write a highly developed essay. Well, what does that mean? There's no essays in the world. Essays are social creations, the cultural products. So we have in mind some conception of what the final ideal state is. Here's the ideal essay. And when something's going to develop, it's going to develop in that direction. So we identify the ideal essay. We break it down into its parts. And we say those parts are becoming differentiated. The parts are coming together, and they all come together to form this ideal essay over time, or the ideal capacity to write an essay. So here you go. Here's our idealization of our concepts of animals. We said before, we have this notion, a developed concept of animals is a taxonomy with a hierarchy of animals and has multiple parts. We are able to differentiate different animals, figure out how those animals are related, how they're different. Moves from undifferentiated to differentiated to integrated toward the hypothetical or idealized conception of what it is that we mean by animals. Differentiation and integration, the hypothetical or developmental endpoint. Development is defined in terms of its endpoint. All right, something is developing. And then we ask, what are the steps toward which that thing emerges? So, how do you identify the endpoint of something that's developing? This is something we'll be doing. We perform a task analysis. Well, what's a task analysis? A task analysis, you identify what is to be done in order for the person to be able to do the task or do the thing that you want them to do. Let's take a jumping jack. What do you have to do a jumping jack? Well, you got to jump. You got to extend the legs. You got to bring the legs back to the center. You have to extend your arms over your head. You have to bring the arms back over their head. You have to coordinate extending the legs and bringing the legs back to the center you have to coordinate extending the arms up over the head and bringing them back down, and you have to coordinate both of those together while you're jumping. Jumping jack seems like a real easy thing to do. But if we break it down, we see that what the child has to do in order to do a jumping jack is that the child has to differentiate the parts of the jumping jack, the jump from the extending of the legs, from the bringing the legs together, for the extending the arms and bringing the arms, then also has to, at the same time often, has to coordinate those parts together. And then once those parts are all coordinated together, we have a fully functioning, idealized, hierarchically organized, single, integrated jumping jack. There's the parts, there's the relations. So, development. If you want to foster development or understand development, here's some core principles. 1. First of all, value presuppositions are inevitable. There's no escape, nor should there be. The value presuppositions that we have helped us to define what we take to be developed endpoints. What is the developed state? What do we take to be developed mathematical concepts, a developed essay, a developed self, a developed relationship, a developed form of understanding or evaluating the self? And you're right if you're thinking that our conceptions of development, and indeed our sequences of what we are going to take to be development or development, are going to differ with respect to our different conceptions of what the end point, the proper end point of development is. Note that these involve value presuppositions. It's not simply a matter of going out and looking and seeing what development is. There's value presuppositions here, which messes around with our traditional notion of science, developmental science. Science is supposed to be based on empirical observation. And here I am suggesting to you that it's not simply a matter of empirical observation. Indeed, we're going to look empirically and we're going to see what parts are going into the developing whole. But that developing whole, what we take to be a developmental endpoint, involves value judgments. It's weird, huh? All new knowledge and skills are differentiated out of old or existing knowledge and skills. Just like the kitty, akin to embryogenesis. Students will necessarily assimilate all new meanings and skills to their existing ways of thinking and doing. They cannot do otherwise. So an implication of this idea that all new knowledge and skills are differentiated out of old and knowledge and skills. Remember, we start off as undifferentiated, and then we split our ideas, and then we bring them back together, just like in embryogenesis. It's orthogenetic. Well, if we start off with, that's Billy, the cat, the kitty, when I see the rabbit, and if I've never seen a rabbit before, I have to assimilate that rabbit. I use my kitty concept, my existing concepts, to understand that thing in front of me. I might think of it as a kitty. Look at the kitty. And then I begin to differentiate the kitty from the bunny. Oh, they're not the same thing. But initially, I assimilate anything new to my existing understandings. I assimilate, incorporate, I know the new thing through my existing thing. And it is only by differentiating, making further differentiations in my existing concepts that I'm able to develop psychologically. As a result, instruction, if you're going to instruct somebody, if parenting or what have you, a teaching, instruction must proceed just ahead of the student's existing knowledge and skills. It can move faster and slower, but ultimately it cannot be accelerated. A student can only learn and develop at the pace that they can learn and develop in the context that they're in. Why? Because any new knowledge is developed out of old knowledge. I have to revise my old knowledge to get new knowledge. I can't simply add new knowledge to old knowledge. It's not the way it works. New knowledge is differentiated out of old knowledge. This is why lectures alone, for example, don't work, and active guiding learning and doing does. Lectures alone, if you lecture somebody and you expect them to move from where they are in a naive state to where you are after the lecture, that's never going to happen. It's never going to happen because the child will always assimilate whatever it is that you're saying to their existing structures, to their existing ways of knowing. And that's why development and learning is a slower process, because the child must actively revise his or her own ideas relative to what they're being told. This is why grades alone don't tell us what students know and do. Place we're going to be going later on. Development moves, higher order development anyway, moves from the relational to the individual, not from the individual to the relation, from the social to the individual, not from the individual to the social. Here you got a student working alone. It's classic developmental flow here. Classic developmental principle here. Let's say you got these three levels. The kid is moving, is interacting alone. Alone, let's say the kid can only do A and B. Can do these two things together. Actually, it doesn't say that. Even the kid can do A and then B. They're not coordinated. You can do these two differentiated things, but can't link them up. Okay. The kid can turn the handle on the jack-in-the-box and hold the jack-in-the-box, but maybe can just do it once. Or maybe can look at the jack-in-the-box and turn the handle. Just these two things. But then working with the teacher, the child is scaffolded. Working with the teacher, look what happens. The student's level of functioning increases higher than the student is able to attain alone. And now, with the teacher, the child has a more differentiated, now there's three of these little bubbles, and integrated, connected ideas, more differentiated, more connected, higher level of functioning when you're working with another person, especially a more accomplished person, than you're able to do alone. So, with the other person, when you're scaffolded, you're functioning at a higher level. And then you go back alone after you're working with the teacher, and what happens is that you're functioning at a higher level than you did when you were alone, but a lower level than you're doing with the teacher. So that novel, higher order ways of being in the world, psychological structures, ways of thinking, feeling, and acting, emerge first between people. Between people. Here's the higher one. And then once they emerge, when you go home, you're at a lower level because you need to consolidate those things, because they have to assimilate to your existing structures, because you have to revise those existing structures to meet this higher order level. So development looks in this kind of curve between working together and working alone. It's going to go up and down and up and down and up and down. Skills are jointly constructed. Higher order skills are jointly constructed, but individually coordinated by the child. We work with others to create new ways of being, but ultimately we have to put those new ways of being together for ourselves. So, again, to promote development, starting with existing skills and knowledge, break down, differentiate the new knowledge and skill elements from the old. If you're going to foster development in someone, or someone's going to develop, you need to take whatever things you want them to be developing, a jumping jack, a capacity to manipulate a jack-in-the-box, an understanding of animals, how to write an essay. You break it down to its parts. And when you do that, the student will begin to differentiate the novel parts from his or her own existing understanding. You then integrate those parts. You put them together to form new structures. You take the differentiated parts, you put them together to create more integrated parts. And what you can do is you can look at some jumping jack films. Now, let's see if I can do this. I'm not going to be able to do this. I'm going to stop at that point. Okay. That's a quick and dirty overview of some of the central concepts of development. Perhaps the most important one that I want you to play around with at this point is the idea of the orthogenetic principle. And the orthogenetic principle is this one. As development moves, it moves from an undifferentiated state to states of increasing differentiation, integration, and hierarchic integration. A more developed state is one that is, relative to some endpoint, more differentiated, integrated, and hierarchically integrated. More to come.